There's a strange moment that happens in almost every family, especially when there are siblings involved. One kid thinks the other is weird. Not dangerous, not mean, not even wild, just weird. It usually starts when one of them begins doing something different, something outside the box. And at first, everyone kind of chuckles. The parents might brush it off, the friends might not even notice, but that one sibling? They're the first to speak up. And the word weird? It rolls off their tongue like a joke, but it hits like a dart. What happens when the thing they call weird turns out to be brilliant? What if the quiet little habit, the odd drawings, the stuff that no one really got, suddenly becomes worth thousands? Literally. That's exactly what happened to a little girl in this story. A girl who got laughed at, ignored, even mocked by her own brother until her artwork was put on display, and the whole world looked at it differently. But before we dive into the full story, I want you to think about something. Have you ever seen someone get underestimated? Someone close to you? Maybe even in your own family? Maybe they weren't loud. Maybe they weren't the popular one. Maybe they liked things no one else cared about. But there was something in them that just felt different. Maybe even strange. We've all been there, whether we were the ones being called weird or the ones doing the name calling. And in today's video, you're going to find out how one girl's strange little drawings turned her into a sensation, shocked her entire family, and made everyone, including her brother, eat their words. This story has layers. It's about art, yes, but also about belief, judgment, and how society, and sometimes even family, fail to see value until the world gives it a price tag. And here's the twist that'll keep you glued to the screen. There's something buried in this story that nobody saw coming. Not her brother, not her parents, and certainly not the people at the auction who started bidding tens of thousands on her work. There's a single moment in this video that reveals the exact turning point, when her weird art went from family joke to high-stakes treasure. I'm going to take you there. You're not just watching a story, you're going to feel this one. And if you stick with me to the very end, I promise you'll not only see how the tables turned, but you'll also understand why. Because what happened to this young girl could happen to anyone, including someone you know, maybe even you. Now, let's rewind a little. It all started in a small town that could be just like yours. Not a big city, not some artsy metropolis, just one of those neighborhoods where people mow their lawns on Sundays and wave to the mailman. The kind of town where everyone knows your name and your business. The Carter family lived at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac in a modest, 3-bedroom house. Dad was an HVAC technician. Mom worked part-time at the library. And the 2 Carter kids, Nathan, age 13, and Emily, age 10, couldn't be more different. Nathan was your typical middle schooler. Into sports, had a decent TikTok following, played Minecraft after school, and always had some smart remark ready to go. Emily? Well, she was the quiet one. The kind of kid who stared out the car window longer than normal. She hummed to herself while drawing in the back seat and collected bottle caps because she thought they had stories. She didn't care for video games, didn't talk much in class, and wore the same old hoodie with doodles on the sleeves nearly every day. To Nathan, his little sister was just, let's say it, weird. And not in a dangerous or disturbing way. Just in that way that makes a 13-year-old boy roll his eyes every time she says something a little too deep for a family dinner. And like most brothers would, he teased her. Constantly. It started out small, calling her Doodle Monster or Queen of Scribbles. But as Emily's drawings became more intense, full of abstract shapes, surreal faces, colors that didn't make sense, Nathan upped the sarcasm. "What even is that?" he'd say, laughing with his friends. "Seriously, Em, you draw like an alien." Emily never fought back, never argued. She just kept drawing, always in that same old sketchbook with the broken spine and paint smudges on every corner. She carried it like other kids carried cell phones. Everywhere. At school. At dinner. Even to bed. But here's the part that'll hit you hardest. She never showed anyone what was inside. Not her mom. Not her teachers. Not even her closest friend. It was her private universe. One that nobody took seriously. That is, until one day, a substitute art teacher, Mr. Levin, noticed Emily sketching in the back of the classroom while the others were gluing macaroni on construction paper. He asked to see her work. She hesitated. He insisted what he saw. It stopped him cold. Now, before we get to what happened next, I want to speak to you for a second, the person watching this right now. Maybe you clicked on this video because the title made you curious. Maybe it reminded you of your own sibling. Or maybe, just maybe, you're someone who's been called weird before. Listen, weird is just a word people use when they don't understand something. And stories like this one? They're proof that what people call weird today can turn into something the whole world can't stop talking about tomorrow. So, if you've ever felt like the outsider, like the one no one quite gets, this story is your story. Stay with me, because you're about to see a transformation that will leave you speechless. And not in a fairy tale kind of way, but in a real way. The kind that happens when the right person sees the value no one else noticed. Back in that classroom, Mr. Levin didn't just compliment Emily's work. He asked if he could take a few photos of it to show a friend who curates youth art exhibitions. Emily was hesitant, but something in his tone told her he meant it. The next day, he called her parents. Not to warn them, not to discipline her, but to invite them to an art show happening the following month in the city, featuring emerging child artists. Her parents were surprised. Emily? Our Emily, they asked. She'd never even taken formal lessons. But Mr. Levin insisted. You don't understand. What your daughter is doing isn't just talent. It's rare. It's raw. And it's powerful. Nathan wasn't impressed. In fact, he thought the whole thing was a joke. He even filmed a TikTok in his room holding up one of her drawings saying, POV, when your little sister draws nightmares instead of flowers, complete with a laughing emoji overlay. The video got a few hundred views and a lot of LOL comments. He showed it to Emily. She didn't say anything, just looked at him, then went back to her room, sketchbook in hand. That night, she didn't come to dinner. But the story doesn't end there. Not even close. Because a month later, Emily's work was hanging in a gallery in front of dozens of people with money. Critics. Collectors. People who'd spent years looking for the next big thing in modern art. And what happened when one of her pieces was picked up by a major buyer? When the bidding started at $500, then $2,000, then shot up past $10,000. Nathan wasn't laughing anymore. In fact, he was silent. For the first time, he looked at his sister's work and didn't see weird. He saw genius. But that's just the beginning. What happened next turned the entire family dynamic upside down and brought out secrets no one expected. One of Emily's paintings, just one, would end up revealing something so personal, so emotionally powerful that it changed everything they thought they knew about her and about each other. So the question is, what was really behind those strange drawings? Why did Emily never show anyone? And how did a little girl who barely spoke in class end up being the star of an art auction worth more than some family homes? The answers are coming, but only if you stay with me until the end. Because the truth hiding behind Emily's art? It's something no one, especially Nathan, was ready to face. And just when you think you've got it figured out, something happens at the auction that flips the whole story on its head. You won't believe who tries to buy her final painting because it's not who you think. Keep watching. You need to hear the rest. What most people at the gallery didn't know, what even her own parents didn't fully realize, is that Emily's art wasn't just born out of some vague creative instinct. It had a source, something deeper than just imagination. Something that had been quietly shaping her sketches for nearly a year. While other kids her age were on TikTok doing dance challenges or gaming on Roblox, Emily was drawing late into the night, her tiny lamp casting long shadows across her cluttered desk. Her walls were covered in pinned-up scraps, sketches of faces with hollow eyes, surreal dreamscapes, strange symbols, animals that looked just slightly wrong. Her room wasn't messy in the usual kid way. It looked like a tiny workshop inside the mind of someone much older, maybe even haunted. Her brother Nathan would walk past, roll his eyes, and mutter under his breath, "Seriously, who even thinks of this stuff?" But Emily never responded. She hadn't really talked much to Nathan in weeks, not since that TikTok he posted mocking her in front of all his friends. Something shifted after that. Not just in their relationship, but in her entire mood. What her family didn't see were the quiet moments that Emily spent outside, sitting at the edge of their backyard beneath the rusted wind chime that hadn't rung properly in years. Every evening around sunset, she'd go there with her sketchbook and just stare. At the trees, at the sky, at nothing. Sometimes she'd sit for an hour without drawing a single thing. Sometimes, she'd come back in and rip out pages, shove them under her bed. Other times, she'd hide them in the old wooden box she kept locked in her closet, an antique her grandmother had once given her before passing away. No one had opened that box in months, maybe longer. And whatever was inside it clearly mattered enough for Emily to hide the key in the lining of her backpack, carefully stitched into the inner seam. It wasn't just a sketchbook anymore. It was a vault. There was one particular day, just 2 weeks before the gallery exhibit, when something fell off. Her mom, noticing the dark circles under Emily's eyes, asked if she was sleeping okay. Emily gave a quick nod and changed the subject. But later that night, her mom overheard her talking in her sleep, whispering really, repeating the same phrase over and over. "He's still there. He's still there." Her mother brushed it off as a nightmare, just the result of a vivid imagination. But that phrase lodged itself in her brain like a splinter. The next morning, Emily acted like nothing happened. She packed her bag, headed to school, and returned home as usual, sitting at her desk and drawing into the evening. But something about her drawings had changed. The color palette shifted. The bright reds and yellows she once used were gone, replaced by deep grays, cold blues, and harsh lines that sliced across the page like warnings. The art teacher, Mr. Levin, had been checking in regularly since discovering Emily's work. He encouraged her parents to let her explore her style, even recommending a few online contests and youth art foundations. But when he came over to review her latest pieces, he paused. His expression changed. "There's something heavier in this batch," he said, trying to keep his voice light. "Did she mention where these images are coming from?" Her parents shook their heads. Levin didn't press. But later, after leaving the house, he made a phone call, not to a gallery, not to a friend, but to someone named Meredith, a former colleague who specialized in art therapy for children. He left a message. "Meredith, it's happening again. Call me back." What could that possibly mean? What was happening again? Was this something Levin had seen before? Was there something in Emily's art that only trained eyes could recognize? Something beyond talent? Something that hinted at trauma? And if so, where had it come from? There were no recent events the family could recall that might explain such a dramatic shift in her emotional world. At least, nothing obvious. But then, there were things that didn't quite add up. A few weeks earlier, Emily had stopped walking home the usual way. She took the longer route now, through the woods that bordered the middle school. Her best friend, Talia, said Emily started acting distant, like she was hiding something. When asked if something had happened at school, bullying, maybe, or something worse, Emily just shrugged and said, "I like the trees better." But later that week, Talia confided in the school counselor that Emily had shown her a drawing that made her uncomfortable. One of a dark figure, faceless, looming behind a row of trees. "He watches," the caption read in tiny, almost invisible writing at the bottom of the page. Meanwhile, at home, Nathan began to feel the shift too. Not just in Emily's behavior, but in the way their parents started paying more attention to her. For a kid used to being the center of attention, the sports star, the outgoing one, it was unsettling. And so he pushed harder. More teasing. More sarcasm. One night, he even snuck into her room and flipped through her sketchbook while she was in the shower. What he saw unnerved him. Not because the drawings were disturbing, but because they felt familiar. One image in particular stood out. A scene of their living room, but twisted. The shadows were too long. The windows too dark. And standing in the corner was a tall figure with no face. The same one from the drawing Emily had shown Talia. Nathan dropped the book and left without saying a word. That night, he didn't sleep well. He told himself it was just his imagination, that his sister was playing some kind of long, weird prank. But deep down, he wasn't so sure. What if she was seeing something the rest of them couldn't? The gallery event approached, and with it, the buzz around Emily's art began to grow. Her work was now being featured on social media, on YouTube Shorts, and even caught the attention of a small influencer in the strange art niche who posted a video titled 10-Year-Old Girl's Creepy Drawings Selling for Thousands. What's really going on? The comments section exploded. Some called her a genius. Others weren't so sure. There's something off about these, one user wrote. Kids don't draw this stuff unless something's wrong. Another said, I swear I've seen that symbol before. The one in the top left corner of her Watcher painting. Anyone else notice? A symbol, hidden in plain sight. A strange, looping design that looked like a snake eating its own tail, but twisted. It appeared in almost all her drawings, tucked into corners, barely visible. No one in the family noticed. Not even Mr. Levin. But YouTube viewers did. Reddit threads popped up. TikTok theories were made. Is Emily channeling something? Is this real art? Or something darker? Theories ranged from psychological trauma to supernatural inspiration. And then came the first real red flag. Emily's final painting, set to be revealed at the gallery on opening night, went missing from her room just 3 days before the event. She didn't tell anyone at first. Her door hadn't been broken into. Nothing else was stolen. But the piece she'd spent over a month working on, one she had only ever shown to herself in the mirror, was gone. When asked about it, she simply said, maybe it wasn't supposed to be seen. But her eyes betrayed her. There was fear there. Real fear. Was it Nathan? Did he take it in another attempt to make a joke or post it online? He denied it. Swore he hadn't even touched her stuff since that night. But the timing was suspicious. And there were others who had access too. Mr. Levin, who'd visited just days before. Talia, who'd been over for a sleepover. Even Emily's mom, who'd recently found the hidden box in her closet unlocked, despite Emily never saying a word. Someone had seen something they weren't supposed to. Someone had taken the one piece that mattered most. And with the auction just days away, everyone was scrambling to figure out where it went and why someone would take it at all. But here's the catch. Emily wasn't panicked. In fact, after the initial shock, she seemed almost calm. Like she expected it. Like it had all happened before. And when she finally said the words, "It's okay. He knows where it is." That's when the real mystery began. Who is he? Why did she say it like she wasn't afraid of him, but also wasn't in control? And most importantly, what was on that final painting that someone didn't want the world to see? The morning after Emily's final painting vanished, things around the house felt different. Not just quieter, but almost like the air had thickened. Her mother tried to maintain normalcy, packing lunches, asking if anyone had seen her good scissors, commenting on how cold it had gotten overnight. But the tension lingered under every word, like everyone was silently waiting for someone else to make the first move. Emily was unbothered on the surface, eating cereal like any other day, casually flipping through the local newspaper she never used to care about. But there was something in the way she kept glancing toward the hall closet. The same closet where the painting had last been seen leaning, wrapped in brown paper. It was gone now, and what made it worse was that no one remembered ever seeing her wrap it up. The paper just appeared there one morning, almost like someone else had prepared it. Later that day, Nathan found something strange in the mailbox. It wasn't addressed to anyone. Just a plain white envelope with the words "Stop Looking" written in bold, black marker. No postage. No return address. Just placed there by someone close enough to walk up without being noticed. He thought it was a prank at first, tossed it on the counter like it was junk mail. But Emily froze when she saw it. Her hand hovered over the envelope like she wanted to touch it, but didn't. Her mom picked it up next, confused. "Is this one of your school projects?" she asked. But no one answered. Because the handwriting, as Nathan realized with a sickening twist in his stomach, looked eerily similar to the one in Emily's sketchbook captions. It looked like her own. That night, things escalated. Nathan, still uneasy from the envelope incident, decided to go back into Emily's room while she was outside. He didn't like doing it, but something about her calmness scared him more than her art ever had. He lifted the mattress this time, not just the usual spots, and found a flash drive taped to the bottom. No label, just black plastic. He took it to his own room, plugged it into his laptop, and waited. Inside were 4 files. All videos. All silent. Each one showed a time-lapse of Emily painting, but from an angle that didn't make sense. The camera wasn't set up in her room. It looked like it was filmed through a mirror. Like someone had recorded her reflection without her knowing. And in the final clip, right before the footage cut out, there was a brief flash of movement behind her. A shadow, tall, thin, distorted by the curve of the glass, moving just out of frame. Nathan yanked the drive out, breathing hard. He didn't know what to think. Was Emily setting this up? Filming herself? But no, the reflection didn't match the angle of her mirror, and the timestamp on the files showed a date from 3 months ago. A night when the whole family had been out at a friend's barbecue. Emily wasn't even home. He wanted to tell someone. Their mom. Mr. Levin. Anybody. But instead, he did something else. He made a copy of the videos and uploaded one to a private Reddit thread, asking for help identifying the figure. Within hours, the thread blew up. People pointed out strange glitches in the footage. Hidden symbols. Echoes of a viral YouTube mystery from a few years ago, a series of ARG-style videos tagged The Watcher, linked to similar imagery and themes. And then the comments turned darker. One user claimed to have seen the same symbol in a now-deleted TikTok trend involving haunted art. Another warned him not to share more. Take this down. These things don't want to be seen. You're already marked. Nathan closed the thread, deleted the post, but it was too late. The next day, his laptop crashed. Permanently. The drive overheated. Files gone. Emily said nothing. But when he saw her later that night, she was sketching again. Not with fear, not with frustration, but with the kind of quiet certainty that chilled him to the bone. You shouldn't have watched, she whispered without looking up. He doesn't like that. Meanwhile, their mom started noticing more things out of place. The family photo in the hallway had been flipped around. Her favorite plant withered overnight. And then, the most alarming discovery. One of her old journals from college, buried deep in a storage box in the attic, had been moved. And inside the front cover, someone had scribbled a message that hadn't been there before. We never told her. That's the mistake. That's when everything started to unravel. Their mother confronted her husband about the journal. He turned pale. He confessed something he'd kept buried for years. Something about Emily's birth. Something about a series of odd events that began shortly after she was born. Her sudden sleepwalking spells, the unexplainable way her nursery door would always be open in the morning, even when locked. He'd brushed it off. Coincidence. But now he admitted they'd once visited a spiritual healer, a woman who told them that Emily's spirit was touched by something old, something drawn to silence and creativity. They had laughed it off, but the woman had given them a talisman, a small carved stone with a looping symbol, the same one now showing up in Emily's art. They lost the stone years ago. Or maybe it was taken. But the warning was clear. It will try again. Through color. Through paper. Through the ones who see without understanding. Emily was 10. She couldn't possibly understand any of this. And yet, she was channeling something. Or someone. And now, with the final painting missing, strange footage resurfacing, and warnings arriving in their mailbox, the pieces weren't just unsettling. They were dangerous. Just when they thought it couldn't get more tangled, a man named Elias showed up at their door. Said he was from the gallery. Claimed he was a curator interested in promoting Emily's work nationally. He was calm, well-dressed, polite, but there was something off. He didn't ask to see the paintings. Didn't even ask to meet Emily. Instead, he walked into the house, pointed to the hallway wall, and said, "It was here before, wasn't it?" The painting she wrapped. It stood right there. No one had mentioned that. Not publicly. Not online. Not even to Mr. Levin. And when asked how he knew, Elias just smiled and replied, "Because it was mine before it became hers." That's where we're going to stop. Now ask yourself, who really created the final painting? Why did Emily say he knows where it is? And most importantly, what happens when something meant to stay hidden gets seen? Just as Elias stood in the hallway, casually revealing his connection to the missing painting like it was a simple detail, Nathan's phone vibrated in his pocket. He ignored it at first, still locked in silent disbelief, but it buzzed again and again. Finally, he pulled it out, and his stomach dropped. It was a string of messages from Clara, his cousin on his dad's side, someone he hadn't spoken to in months. They'd grown up close, but after she moved to Oregon, the distance and time turned their bond into the occasional meme exchange and awkward holiday texts. But these messages were anything but casual. They were panicked. The first one read, "Hey, I think this has something to do with you." The next had a photo attached. A grainy image of a postcard, stamped and mailed to her apartment, with the same symbol from Emily's paintings scribbled on the back. The front showed a painting, almost identical in style to Emily's, of a faceless girl standing in a garden of eyes. Clara's final message said, "Didn't you say your sister paints creepy stuff like this? I swear I've seen this girl before in a dream." Nathan's pulse quickened. He turned the phone toward Elias, who didn't even blink. "It's starting again," the man muttered, half to himself. "She's not the only one." Nathan demanded answers. Who was she? Why was Clara being targeted too? Elias offered nothing but vague warnings and evasive smiles. "The influence spreads," he said cryptically, "not through blood, but through memory. Anyone who remembers becomes part of it. And some memories aren't even theirs to begin with." Later that night, Nathan video called Clara. She looked pale, bags under her eyes, hands shaking slightly as she showed him the postcard again. She said she found it wedged between her apartment door and the frame. Not in the mailbox, not under the rug. It hadn't been there when she left for work. And worse, she said it felt familiar, not just the art, but the feeling it gave her. Like déjà vu, but heavier. She swore she'd seen that faceless girl before, not just in dreams, but years ago, when she was 13, while staying at Nathan's house over the summer. "You remember when Emily was like 4 and she drew that creepy crayon mural on the garage wall?" she asked. "I swear this girl was in it. Everyone thought it was random, but I remember her eyes. They weren't there." Nathan remembered that summer. The garage wall had been painted over after their dad saw the drawing. Too unsettling, even though Emily had been just a toddler. No one took it seriously. But now the idea that she'd been drawing this same figure for years, long before she could even write her name properly, sent a chill through him. How long had this been going on? How many others had seen it and forgotten? Or worse, remembered and stayed silent? The next twist came fast. Clara, trying to help, decided to scan the postcard and reverse image search it. What she found shook both of them. A nearly identical painting had shown up at a private collector's auction in New York just last year. The listing title? The Girl Without Eyes. Anonymous artist. Sold for $19,000. The only note attached said, "Recovered from fire damage home in Georgia, 2007. Owner deceased." Clara cross-checked the date and location. That same year, there was a widely ignored news story about a family found dead in their home outside Savannah. Cause of death? Unknown. No signs of forced entry. No gas leaks. But all mirrors in the house were shattered. Nathan sent the link to Elias, demanding answers. Elias only replied with a single line. "You're not supposed to be this deep yet." And that's when the lights went out. In the house. All at once. No storm. No warning. Just instant, suffocating darkness. Their mom screamed from the living room, and Nathan rushed out, phone flashlight shaking in his hand. Emily was nowhere to be found. Her sketchbook, usually locked in her desk drawer, lay open on the floor. But instead of drawings, the pages had been blacked out. Solid, heavy marker. Page after page. Except for one. The final page wasn't drawn in marker, but paint. A new painting. Wet to the touch. A familiar garden of eyes. And in the center, standing beneath a tree that looked eerily like the one in their backyard, was a tall, shadowed figure with no face, holding the hand of a small child. And beneath it, a caption, written in a child's handwriting but clearly not Emily's voice. "You looked. Now you see. But can you forget?" Nathan was still staring at the image when a knock came at the front door. Slow. Steady. Not urgent, but deliberate. The kind of knock that lets you know the person outside already knows what's inside. Their mom froze. Elias didn't move. Nathan's breath caught in his throat. He wanted to believe it was a neighbor, maybe someone with answers. But deep down, something told him it wasn't someone who came to help. Something had just stepped into their lives that didn't follow rules, timelines, or logic. And for the first time, it wasn't Emily who was being watched, it was all of them. The door creaked as it slowly opened, but what they saw standing on the other side wasn't what anyone expected. Not a stranger. Not a spirit. It was Mr. Levin. Pale, confused, and holding one of Emily's old paintings, one he swore she'd never finished. But in the corner, in fresh, wet red paint, a new date had been added. Tomorrow's, and no one knew who put it there. The morning after Mr. Levin appeared at their doorstep, Nathan couldn't shake the unease hanging over the house like a thick, invisible fog. The night had ended with confusion, rushed explanations, and a deadbolt that clicked into place like a weak barrier against something much larger than themselves. Mr. Levin claimed he had no memory of where he'd been the past 2 days. Said he'd blacked out after feeling sick in his classroom and woke up that morning in his car, parked just a few blocks from Nathan's house, with Emily's painting laid neatly on the passenger seat. The disturbing part? His clothes weren't the ones he wore the last time he was seen. They were scorched, smoky, like they'd been pulled from a fire. Yet he didn't have a single burn on his body. Nathan wanted to call the police. Or tell someone. Anyone. But how do you report something when you're not even sure if it's real? When the facts feel slippery, like you're chasing shadows and hearing footsteps that vanish the moment you turn around.
He didn't sleep that night.
Neither did Clara, who texted him that she woke up at 3:07 a.m. sharp to find a sticky note on her bathroom mirror that hadn't been there before. It said, "She's remembering too fast," in someone's handwriting she didn't recognize. She lived alone. By noon, Nathan noticed the first sign that someone, or something, was following him. It started subtle. He was walking home from the gas station 2 blocks away, having picked up snacks to clear his head, when he noticed the same silver sedan on 3 different corners. Not parked in the same spot, moved slightly each time. Different angles, different positions. But the same dent above the right tire. The same dull glow tint on the windows that made it impossible to see inside. He didn't tell his mom. She was already on edge. And Emily? She hadn't spoken a single word since last night. Not one. Nathan spent the afternoon trying to piece things together. He rewatched the video footage from their doorbell camera, hoping to catch a glimpse of who left the wet painting outside their door. But when he pulled it up, the timeline glitched. The feed jumped from 2:01 a.m. to 2:34 a.m., a solid 33-minute gap. No error messages, no signs of tampering.
Just lost time.
And when it resumed, the painting was already there, leaning against the doorframe like it had materialized out of thin air. He tried to play it back frame by frame, looking for any movement. That's when he saw it, one frame, frozen between the footage, something that shouldn't have been possible. A single image of the front yard, completely overrun with black figures. Not moving. Not walking.
Just standing. Dozens of them.
Blank-faced, lifeless outlines. But the next frame? Empty. Like nothing had ever been there. He tried to screenshot it, but the moment he did, the entire video file corrupted. Wouldn't open again. Every time he clicked it, it just made a screeching static noise and crashed the app. That night, Clara went missing. Her last text to Nathan was at 11:12 p.m. She'd said she was going to try one more thing, something bold, something reckless. She was going to burn the postcard. She thought maybe destroying the image would break the connection, or at least weaken it. But Nathan never heard from her again. He tried calling. No answer. Tried her friends. Nothing. He even called her landlord, who confirmed her apartment door was locked from the inside, but her phone and purse were still on the kitchen counter. The police were called. They filed a report, but no signs of struggle, no signs of forced entry. As far as anyone could tell, Clara just vanished. Nathan's fear turned into full-blown paranoia. Every shadow felt alive. Every knock, every breeze, every flicker of a light bulb sent his heart racing. He couldn't eat, could barely think straight. And worst of all, Emily had started painting again. But these weren't her usual whimsical images or strange dreamscapes. These were cold, exact, and deeply unsettling. One showed Clara standing in the middle of a lake, waist-deep, with eyes in the water surrounding her like lily pads. Another showed Nathan asleep in his bed, down to the exact pattern of his blanket, with something looming over him, hands almost touching his chest. He tried to ask her where these images were coming from, who told her to paint them, but she just shrugged, eyes glassy, and said, "I don't know. I just feel like I've seen them already." Desperate, Nathan went to the school library and dug through yearbooks, art fair pamphlets, anything he could find that might connect Emily's strange art to something else. That's when he found an old school newspaper article from nearly a decade ago. A student had won a regional art contest with a piece that caused a stir. It was pulled from public viewing within 24 hours after parents complained about its disturbing content. The painting? A girl without eyes, standing beneath a tree. The artist? A girl named Lydia Harrow. Nathan didn't recognize the name, but he recognized the style instantly. It was Emily's, down to the brushstrokes. But Lydia had been 13. This was long before Emily had ever picked up a paintbrush. He searched her name online, nothing current. No social media. No interviews. But one archived news post mentioned her death 3 years later. A tragic accident. Fell from the 3rd story of her home. Except Nathan noticed a detail buried in the article's comments. Someone anonymously wrote, "She drew it before she saw it." That's how it starts. That night, Nathan didn't sleep. He barricaded the doors, turned every light in the house on, and kept a baseball bat next to his bed. But it wasn't until 4:13 a.m. that something changed. He woke with a start, not from a noise, but from silence. Total, absolute silence. No hum of the fridge. No creak of the house settling. Not even the sound of his own breathing. He opened his eyes, and there it was, painted on the wall above his bed. He hadn't heard a brush, hadn't smelled the paint. But it was there, still wet. A new image. Himself, sleeping, but this time the figure above him had eyes. Not blank sockets. Eyes that glowed red. And beneath it, in uneven handwriting, "You're next." And then came the sound, not from the house, but from inside his head. A girl's voice. Whispers, soft, barely a breath. "Don't look. Just forget." But it was already too late. He'd seen everything. Nathan had always thought the worst part of all this was the fear. Fear of the unknown, of what was creeping just out of sight, of what Emily's brush might reveal next. But what he hadn't prepared for was doubt. Not just doubting the world around him, but doubting himself. His memories, his perceptions, even the people closest to him. Because it wasn't until that next morning, after the message above his bed, that the real twist began to unfold, and it would flip everything he thought he understood on its head. He had gone to school late that day. His eyes were bloodshot, hands shaking as he clutched a folder of printed photos, screenshots of the painting, the note on the mirror, the image from the yearbook. He didn't know what he was hoping for. Maybe someone to tell him he wasn't going crazy. Maybe to find someone who could actually help. But when he saw Mr. Levin in the hallway, talking casually with the principal like none of this had ever happened, Nathan's heart sank. Mr. Levin didn't look confused or haunted. He looked calm. Too calm. Like a man who was exactly where he wanted to be. Nathan approached him, desperate for answers. But the moment he got close, Levin's tone changed. His expression didn't show fear or regret. Instead, it was knowing. Almost smug. He leaned in slightly and whispered something that stopped Nathan cold. "You've been asking the wrong questions." Then he turned and walked away like nothing happened. But Nathan couldn't move. Because those words, they were the same ones written in the corner of one of Emily's earliest paintings. One he hadn't paid attention to. A painting they'd sold for barely $50 at a small town fair months ago. The one that featured a row of empty chairs and a single red notebook. Nathan never understood what it meant.
Until now.
He raced home, tore through boxes in the garage, digging for old sketchbooks Emily had filled over the years. He hadn't looked at them since they were younger. back when her drawings were still just strange doodles, not prophecies of darkness. But buried in one of the older pads, behind pages of crayon castles and misshapen stick figures, was a set of entries that made his blood run cold. Pages filled with dates, descriptions, specific times, each one accompanied by a sketch. And every single one depicted something that had happened, not just to them, but to other kids. A boy who vanished from a park in Minnesota. A girl whose artwork had been banned after her suicide in Texas. Even Lydia Harrow. Emily had drawn them before their stories made the news. But the part that chilled Nathan the most was that some of these drawings were dated before Emily could even write full sentences. He brought the sketchbook to his mother, shaking, demanding to know how this was possible. What had Emily seen? What had he missed? And that's when she cracked. She didn't deny the sketches.
She didn't even act surprised.
She sat down slowly, trembling, and said something he never expected. "This has happened before," she whispered. "You just don't remember." Nathan blinked, confused. "What are you talking about?" She took a deep breath and said, "You used to draw too. Just like her. Until it got too dark. Until you saw something you weren't supposed to. You stopped sleeping. You stopped talking. Then you forgot. And I let you forget because it was the only way to keep you safe." The room spun. Nathan felt like the air had been ripped from his lungs. His mother went to the closet, reached into a locked box he'd never seen before, and pulled out a bundle of papers. His drawings.
Old. Dusty.
But real. And there, on the top page, was something that broke his heart. A self-portrait. A young boy sitting at a desk, surrounded by faceless adults, and one girl, his sister, standing behind him, holding a brush. The title, scrawled in his own childlike handwriting, "She Sees What I Erased." Nathan realized then that the mystery wasn't just about Emily's gift. It was about what had been buried in him all along, what he'd suppressed, what had been wiped clean from his memory. But something had brought it back. Something had reignited it in Emily. Maybe through genetics, maybe through trauma, or maybe, as terrifying as it sounded, because something had been waiting for them both to remember. The next blow came fast. He tried to call Clara's sister, hoping to find some connection between Clara's disappearance and the reawakened memories. But her sister didn't answer. Instead, a voice picked up.
"Male. Come."
It wasn't a voice he recognized, yet it spoke his name like they were old friends. "You were supposed to forget, Nathan. Why didn't you forget?" Then the line cut out. Nathan stood frozen, staring at the phone in his hand. Everything he thought was random, chaotic, even supernatural, it all began to feel disturbingly deliberate. This wasn't just a haunting or a series of dark coincidences. This was orchestrated, controlled. Someone or something had been pulling strings from the beginning. And now, he wasn't just trying to understand Emily's gift. He was trying to remember his own. But the scariest part of all? Someone else already had. And they weren't happy about it. The rain hadn't stopped for hours, and Nathan barely noticed it anymore. It was fitting, almost symbolic, as if the sky itself was reflecting the weight that had been pressing down on his shoulders. He sat in his room, staring at the scattered pages on his bed, the drawings from Emily's old sketchbooks, his own childhood sketches that had been hidden away, and the strange, coded messages that had been showing up in places no one else seemed to notice. His mother had gone silent again, retreating into that familiar haze of fear and regret, refusing to say anything more. But Nathan needed answers. The kind that only one other person might still have, the kind of answers that could either bring closure or completely unravel everything he thought he knew about his own life. So he called his father, the man who hadn't been around since Nathan was 8, the man who walked out one winter night and never looked back. He'd left behind no explanations, only a trail of pain and silence. But now, Nathan wasn't so sure it had been abandonment. What if it had been something else, something darker? What if his dad hadn't just left but escaped? It was a theory too wild to speak out loud, but too plausible to ignore. The phone rang 6 times before it picked up. No hello, no greeting. Just breathing. "I need to know what you saw," Nathan said. His voice was low, cracking. Back then. Why you left. Why you took my drawings and buried them. A long pause. Then finally a voice. Tired. Weathered. I didn't take them to bury them, son. I took them because they were starting to match things that hadn't happened yet. And I was told to destroy them. I couldn't. I didn't understand what it meant back then. But someone else did. Nathan's throat tightened. Who? But the line went dead. The silence afterward wasn't just eerie, it was suffocating. Because now he had confirmation that there were more players in this game. People in the shadows, monitoring, manipulating. And worse, they'd been doing it since he was a child. Maybe even before he was born. It was no longer just about a gifted sister and a traumatized brother. This had become something much bigger. Something generational. That same night, a manila envelope was slid under their front door. No postage, no markings, just Nathan's name written in black ink. Inside were photos, dozens of them, showing Emily at different stages of her life, most of which Nathan had never seen. Some appeared to be surveillance shots, her at a school playground, painting in their backyard, even one through the window of her bedroom, clearly taken from a distance. But that wasn't the worst of it. At the bottom of the stack was a recent photo. One Nathan hadn't taken, and neither had anyone in their family. It was of him, sitting in the school library, hunched over the same file of missing persons he'd been researching for weeks. The timestamp on the corner? Just 2 days ago. His heart pounded in his chest. He looked around, suddenly hyper-aware of every creak in the floor, every flicker in the lights. Whoever was watching them wasn't just close, they were inside the rhythm of their lives, tracking every step. That's when a small note fell out of the envelope, handwritten in the same ink as the name on the front. Stop digging or she disappears too. It was an ultimatum. And it wasn't vague. Whoever sent it knew exactly how to strike at his weakest point. He had 2 choices now. Stop asking questions, protect Emily, and pretend none of this ever happened, or keep going, risk everything, and possibly lose the only person who had ever truly understood him. He didn't sleep that night. He sat in Emily's room, watching her sleep, the glow of her nightlight casting soft shadows on the wall. She mumbled in her sleep sometimes, small fragments of stories she never told while awake. And one of them stuck with him that night, just 2 quiet words. He remembers. The weight of it hit him like a freight train. Not only was someone watching them, someone else had been part of this. Someone close. Maybe even someone who had pretended to help. And with every connection Nathan tried to make, the lines blurred more and more. Was Mr. Levin part of it or just a pawn? Was his father hiding to protect them, or to protect himself? Was his mother's silence guilt or fear? The answers were slipping through his fingers. And now, with that threat looming over them, Nathan had to choose. Walk away from the truth, or step into the darkness alone. But before he could decide, something happened that tore everything open even wider. Emily was gone. Not vanished in the middle of the night. Not taken with signs of struggle. Her bed was made. Her shoes were gone. Her latest painting, still wet, sat propped on the easel. And it was the only clue left behind. A massive black swirl in the center of a canvas, with 2 figures standing on either side. One was clearly her. The other was a man in a suit. Faceless. Underneath, in red paint, "You chose wrong." And just like that, the choice was made for him. Now it wasn't about uncovering the truth. It was about saving her, before it was too late. Nathan's breath came in short bursts as he sprinted through the rusted gate of the old community center on the outskirts of town, the place where his mom once said his father used to volunteer before he disappeared. The word volunteer had always sounded strange to him in that context, like it had been chosen deliberately to cover up something heavier, something less innocent. The building had been shut down for over a decade, condemned on paper, but somehow still standing, surrounded by weeds and silence. He hadn't been here since he was a kid, and even then, he'd only seen the outside. But something about Emily's last painting, the suit, the faceless man, the swirl, it all pointed back to this place. And now, with her gone and no one else left to trust, Nathan knew there was no more room for hesitation. Inside, The air was thick and stale, filled with that musty, metallic smell of old paint and forgotten stories. Every step echoed. He gripped the flashlight tighter as he moved down the main corridor, past broken chairs and faded flyers about youth programs that hadn't run since the early 2000s. Then he saw it, down the hallway, a door slightly ajar, with light flickering inside. For a second, his instincts screamed at him to run. But he couldn't. Not without her. He pushed the door open, and what he saw made his stomach drop. The room was lined with photographs. Floor to ceiling. Pictures of children.
Art.
Journals. Sketches. Symbols. Surveillance images. Emily's face appeared at least a dozen times. His face was there too, even from when he was a toddler. Some had annotations in red ink. Circled eyes. Arrows pointing to the shapes in the backgrounds. Phrases like symmetry spike, repetition anomaly, subject echo confirmed. It wasn't just them. There were others. Dozens of others. Kids from the local art program. A few he recognized from school. But others? Strangers. Some of them were marked with red XS. Others just faded. At the center of the wall was a single black and white image that stopped him cold. It was a group photo, dated 1999, of a secret meeting held at the very community center he stood in now. The adults in the photo weren't just parents or teachers. Some were familiar public figures, school board members, local government officials, a psychiatrist his mom once took him to just for a chat. And right in the middle, his father, standing behind a child's art easel, staring at the camera like he knew exactly how this would all unfold. Nathan stumbled back, the room spinning, his head pounding. It wasn't just about Emily's talent or his childhood drawings. This was a long-running experiment, or worse, an operation. They weren't being watched for fun or paranoia. They were part of a system, something organized and deeply rooted, and it had been going on for decades. And then came the voice from the shadows. "You weren't supposed to find this, Nathan." He turned sharply, flashlight beam trembling as it landed on Mr. Levin, his former art teacher. The man looked different now, older, yes, but hardened. There was no trace of the gentle mentor in his expression anymore. Just cold calculation. "You said you were helping me," Nathan whispered. "I was. Until you pushed too far," Levin replied, stepping into the room fully. "There are things you don't understand. Powers at work here that go beyond anything you can imagine. You think your sister was special? She was just one of many. One of the few who didn't break." Nathan's fists clenched. "Where is she?" Levin exhaled. "Safe for now. But if you keep interfering, that won't be the case for long." Behind him, another door creaked open. A woman stepped out. Nathan froze. His mom. Except she wasn't the timid, scared woman he'd known all his life. Her posture was straight, her expression calm, and in her hand was a folder identical to the one in the photo on the wall. "Mom," he breathed.
Her voice was firm.
"I told them to stop using you after your father left. I tried to pull you both out. But they don't let you walk away, Nathan. Not when you're marked." The ground beneath him felt like it had disappeared. His mother. All this time. She knew. Levin interrupted. "He deserves to know what he is. What he was meant to do. We didn't choose you for your art, Nathan. We chose you because your patterns matched ones we've been tracking for 30 years. You replicate what others haven't even seen yet. You and your sister are part of the same stream, mirrors of a larger network." Nathan backed toward the wall, overwhelmed. This isn't real. This can't be. But then his mother opened the folder. Inside was another image, one that shook him to his core. It was his latest sketch. One he had only drawn last week, in private, in a spiral of anxiety and confusion. No one else had seen it. And yet here it was. In her hands. Annotated. Labeled. Studied. "This isn't about talent, Nathan," she said softly. "It's about control. And you were never just drawing pictures." The urgency hit him like a wave. He had to get out. Find Emily. Escape this twisted legacy they'd dragged him into. But before he could move, Levin raised a small device from his coat, a remote of some kind. "If you walk out now, the failsafe activates," Levin warned. You'll never see her again. But if you listen, really listen, you can still help us. Help everyone. You and your sister were meant to be catalysts." Nathan shook his head. "I'm done being your project." But his mother stepped forward, her voice suddenly trembling. "If you don't do this, they'll erase her, Nathan.
And you.
Like the others." And just like that, the entire world tilted again. Now the conspiracy wasn't just vast, it was merciless. And with every second ticking down, he realized he was playing a game with no rules, no guarantees, and no safe exit. Only one thing was clear. The truth wasn't just hidden. It was protected by the people he once loved the most. Nathan stood in the echo of silence, staring at the remote in Levin's hand, every nerve in his body screaming at him to act. But what could he do? His mother's betrayal still twisted in his chest like a knife, and Emily's life was a dangling thread, held hostage by a network of shadows that had manipulated every brushstroke, every sketch, every fragile moment of his childhood. Everything, his art, her paintings, the strange symbols that had followed them like ghosts, wasn't born of coincidence or creativity.
It was all by design.
And he was tired of being the canvas they painted on. The walls around him, covered with faces and red lines and cryptic notes, suddenly felt like they were closing in. His mother's eyes, once warm, now hollow with a lifetime of compromise, met his for just a second longer than they should have. In that instant, he knew she didn't want this any more than he did. Maybe she was coerced. Maybe she believed once.
But now?
She was scared too. Nathan's heartbeat pulsed in his ears as he took a step forward, not toward Levin, but toward her. "You still have a choice," he said, voice low but steady. "You can help me stop this." Her lip trembled. She looked away, but not before slipping a small, silver key into his hand as she passed by him. No words, just a soft whisper, "Storage room 14." Levin didn't notice. He was too busy activating the system, fingers dancing across a screen. The lights in the room dimmed as something powered up in the walls, something massive, electrical, humming with the cold efficiency of a machine that had been waiting decades to wake. On the screen above the control panel, images flashed rapidly. Overlapping geometric codes, brain scan overlays, infrared surveillance. The room itself wasn't just an archive. It was an active monitoring hub, still online, still processing data. Nathan broke into a sprint. Down the back hallway, through a collapsing door, he found storage room 14. The key clicked in the lock just as the building began to shudder under the force of the system coming online. Inside the room was a single terminal, covered in dust. Monitors flickered on as he approached, revealing files labeled with names he recognized, friends, classmates, even Emily.
He clicked her file first.
And what he saw made his blood run cold. Emily's paintings had been tracked for patterns, symbols that repeated across children in various cities over decades. These weren't coincidences. They were signals, warnings. Her last piece, the one he dismissed as just weird, had been a visual map of all the nodes in the network, complete with coordinates, trigger symbols, and one final encrypted message at the bottom. The system ends where it began. Burn the archive. The truth hit him like a truck. Emily wasn't just being watched. She was trying to dismantle it. Her painting wasn't just valuable for its talent. It was a blueprint, and it had been auctioned not because of its artistic value, but because someone out there wanted to suppress what she had exposed. Every bidder knew what it meant. The winning one had erased the trail, taken her, and left Nathan the pieces. He turned to the command prompt on the screen, typing feverishly through the encryption layers, using everything Emily had ever drawn for him as clues. It wasn't just art, it was a cipher. Hidden in each swirl, each odd choice of color, was a password, a sequence. It all came together now. She had been trying to tell him this for months, and he hadn't seen it. Back in the main room, Levin realized what was happening. He stormed down the hall, shouting for security protocols. But it was too late. Nathan initiated the purge. One by one, the files began to self-delete. Surveillance feeds went black. Alarms blared. And as the system collapsed in on itself, Levin burst into the room, furious. He lunged for Nathan, slamming him against the console. "You don't know what you've done," Levin screamed. "You've erased the only thing keeping them safe." Nathan, bleeding and breathless, growled back. They were never safe. They were controlled. They fought, brutal, clumsy, real. A table flipped. The monitor cracked. But Nathan had the advantage of fury, of purpose. He struck Levin with the edge of a metal case, knocking him unconscious. As he caught his breath, sirens rang louder. Backup was coming. But just before he could escape, the screen blinked once more. A video began to play automatically, an old recording. Static faded into the image of his father, seated in this very room, 20 years younger. He looked scared.
Desperate.
If you're seeing this, it means the program failed or succeeded too well. They won't tell you the truth. None of us knew what we were doing. The patterns, the kids, we were amplifying something ancient, something buried. We thought we were protecting people, but we were summoning it. Nathan froze. His father's words chilled him. "I tried to stop it. I tried to warn your mother. But once the art is seen, truly seen, it embeds. It spreads. The last node is emotional. It lives in memory, in trauma. If she painted the final piece, it's already too late." And then the video cut out. Nathan stood there, stunned. The building continued to burn digitally, data collapsing around him, but the deeper realization began to gnaw at him. The system was never the true threat. It was what the system was holding back. He ran, escaped into the night as the building's power grid failed, sparks raining from the fuse boxes. Outside, a black SUV sat idling. His mother was in the passenger seat, motioning wildly for him to get in. Inside, to his relief, was Emily, alive, shaken but alive. She stared at him with wide, terrified eyes. "You stopped it," she whispered. Nathan didn't answer. He just looked at her, heart pounding. Then Emily opened her sketch pad and handed it to him. One final drawing.
Fresh.
Drawn just moments ago. It was him, but not him. The eyes were hollow, the smile wrong. And above the figure, in Emily's now trembling handwriting, were 3 words that shattered him more than any conspiracy ever could. It got out. And with that, the truth finally settled in. They hadn't destroyed the pattern. They had unleashed it. The SUV moved quietly through the cold stretch of night, its headlights cutting through layers of fog that had begun to roll in from the nearby river. Nathan sat in the back seat, his eyes locked on Emily's sketchpad resting on his lap, fingers tracing the pencil lines she had drawn so frantically just an hour ago. He hadn't spoken since they fled the compound.
Neither had she.
His mother, now stripped of her control and secrets, drove with a haunted focus, as if the road ahead was the only thing keeping her from collapsing under the weight of decades she could no longer justify. There were no words left between them, only silence, heavy and telling, filled with regret, grief, and unanswered questions that none of them were ready to ask. But even in that silence, Nathan's mind spun, still trying to comprehend the immensity of what they had unleashed. The pattern, as they called it, wasn't just a technology or a psychological phenomenon. It was something deeper, more primal, something ancient and intangible, now untethered from the digital cages designed to contain it. What terrified Nathan most wasn't that it existed. It was how effortlessly it had infected their lives, disguising itself as inspiration, memory, intuition. It had lived in their art, their dreams, their fears, and now that it had no borders, no surveillance systems keeping it contained, it could spread freely, through emotion, through images, through memory itself. In the days that followed, the media tried to make sense of the fire at the facility. The official report pinned it on a systems failure in an outdated research archive. A few headlines floated through social media. Underground lab fire linked to defunct brainwave study. Leaked footage shows high-tech surveillance facility in ruins. But no one mentioned the files, or the symbols, or the thousands of children unknowingly drawn into a pattern that never should have been touched. Most of the public moved on after a day or two, distracted by the next viral news cycle, celebrity drama, trending AI filters, another political scandal. Nathan watched the coverage from a small motel room in Vermont, where they were laying low. Each broadcast felt surreal, like watching echoes of a life he no longer belonged to. He had burned the system, but he hadn't burned the knowledge. That lived on in him. In Emily. In anyone who had seen enough of the symbols to recognize their shapes in dreams or shadows or random scribbles on a cafe napkin. It was a virus of the mind, and like all ideas, it couldn't be unthought. Emily started drawing again, quietly, cautiously. Her sketches were softer now, less frantic, more grounded. She said the dreams had quieted since they left the city, though sometimes she would wake up with tears in her eyes and not remember why. Nathan had stopped painting altogether. For the first time in his life, the idea of creating something terrified him. He was afraid that if he picked up a brush, he might unknowingly let it in again. But even with all that fear, something inside him had shifted. There was a calm now, a steadiness that came not from closure, but from the clarity of knowing the truth. He had spent so long chasing answers about his past, his family, the strange pull that art had always had on him, and while those answers hadn't come in the way he'd expected, they had come nonetheless. He had faced the darkness that shaped him, stared it down, and walked away still standing. One evening, weeks later, Nathan sat on the porch of their small rented cabin, the sun sinking low across the pine trees, casting everything in gold. His mother joined him, quietly, a mug of tea in her hand. They didn't talk about the facility, or the files, or the betrayals that still hung heavy between them. Instead, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. A photograph. It was old and faded, but unmistakable. His father holding him as a baby, the same wide, searching eyes Nathan had seen in the mirror 1,000 times. On the back, scrawled in his father's sharp handwriting, were 4 simple words. "You are the key." Nathan didn't ask what it meant. He just nodded, because somewhere inside he already knew. This wasn't over. Maybe it never would be. The pattern might be gone in one form, but ideas don't die. They evolve, change shape, find new hosts. It might take years or decades, but one day, someone would stumble across a painting or a notebook or an archive that was never fully deleted. And when they did, they'd feel it too, that pull, that recognition, that electric thread connecting them to something they couldn't quite explain. As the wind picked up and the trees swayed gently under the coming night, Nathan looked out into the distance and finally spoke. "When it comes back," he said softly, "we'll be ready." And behind him, inside the house, Emily was drawing again. This time, she wasn't afraid.